This week we'll be talking about August Wilson's play Fences, and that'll be the last work of literature that we address this semester. After we get done discussing this, we'll have our final online. That'll be an essay format final, as I mentioned in the discussion board, uh, and you'll have your final paper to turn in, and that will conclude English 250. Before we start talking about Fences, though, I want to spend just a minute wrapping up a couple of ideas on the John Donne poem, which really is as we've discovered, a very complicated, in some ways, a very difficult poem. Uh, in that last metaphor, and I think everybody recognized that the last metaphor, the one of the compass, uh, has, as we can see in the imagery and even the word choices and some other things, has a very clearly sexual content to it. There's no question of that. But the metaphor also ties to the previous metaphors that really were looking at love more as a spiritual matter and something that's eternal and part of the soul. In fact, if you think about uh, the compass draws a circle, which is, of course, always a symbol of something which is eternal. In that way, and it ties to the other metaphors and really suggests that it's functioning. Remember, we talked about metaphysical conceits, which function in a variety of different ways and with all different levels of complication. It really functions to tie in both the spiritual and the physical part. As we got to the end of that discussion, I was asking you to connect the the uh, physical parts of that last metaphor with the first image that we have in the poem, the image of the dying man. Remember, his gaze would be upwards towards the heavens, but looking through his friends, and to see how they might be connected. What I want you to understand is that last image doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be sexual, although I guess maybe that's appropriate since it seems to be a poem about love within a marriage, but it does have to be physical. And in fact, when we look at that image from the beginning, that virtuous man looking up towards the heavens doesn't see the heavens. He sees his sad friends looking down at him. The uh, he is seeing the heavens um, as defined by the vision of his friends. In the same way, that idea of the stained glass window that I introduced to you in stanza 2, where we have the different difference between the sacred space within the church and the profane outside the church, the ordained and the laity, those distinctions. The view towards the heavens from inside the sacred space is not straight towards the sun, but it's rather the sunlight as transformed by the physical glass window, which creates the which creates the sacred the image of the sacred space within the cathedral. In another poem, Donne wrote, "Love's mysteries in souls do grow." Okay, in other words, the nature of love is a nature of that part of the person that's eternal. Then the next line, "But yet the body is his book." Love's mysteries and souls do grow, but yet the body is his book. To learn those mysteries, Donne is suggesting, one needs to learn through the body, or through, as he points out in the valediction, through the five senses. That last image has to be physical because it's through the way that we experience the world through our five senses that one can learn the mysteries of the love that is, as he tells us in that stanza that I asked you to look for, so much refined that ourselves know not what it is. The pathway towards the spiritual, he suggests to us, has to be through the physical, and that works not only in this love poem, but as I think we would find elsewhere in Donne's poetry, also through other gestures towards the sacred as well. One way that I like to conclude this poem is by thinking of the musical, which I'm sure many of you have seen, Les Miserables, which has been made into a whole bunch of different movies, and it's been broadcast on PBS. And if you took a French class in high school, you probably had a field trip to see a production of Les Mis. I hope you did. It's a magnificent play. If we think of the very ending of that play, we have Jean Valjean dying. He's lived a long and very difficult life. Uh, his position is very much like the position we're invited to see of the man in stanza one. He's looking upwards towards the heavens, but like that man, he's not seeing the heavens. Instead, he's looking upwards towards Cosette, who's looking down at him, and Marius, who's looking down at him. They're the the two young people that he has saved, and we know at the end of the play the promise is that they'll go on and live happy lives that have been made possible by him. He's viewing the heavens, and we find that he is at peace as the man in the poem, but he's viewing the heavens by looking through and beyond the people who are looking at him. He's seeing the people that he loves and the people who love him, and through that he gets the image of heaven. The last line that he sings, it's right before the whole crew comes out and does the whole big number of "Do you hear the people singing the songs of angry men," which gives a really nice way to leave the theater. But Jean Valjean's last line in his song um, is different. He looks up at them and says, to love another person is to see the face of God. Whoever wrote that part of the libretto was thinking in very similar ways to what John Donne gives us in A Valediction Forbidding Mourning. And that's the connection that I want you to see in that poem. Okay, now let's switch gears and switch gears in a really profound way and go to August Wilson's play Fences. Wilson was a brilliant playwright, and he set out to write 10 plays, each chronicling a decade of the African American experience through the 20th century. Uh, in a really tragic way, Wilson died at still a really young age. I think he was just about 60, right after the last play in the series was completed. Fences is a play that stands very well all by itself, but it also is part of, of this 10 play series that chronicle the, the experiences of African Americans as the 20th century progressed. Um, the play is all of them are brilliant and they're wonderful. Fences, I think, is among the very best of all of them. This is the play set in the 1950s, and we find the characters who become in some ways larger than life, like Troy and Rose and Bono, his friend, and then also the two sons, Lyons, who is we'll talk about Lyons in a little while. Uh, these characters become really very real to us, and Wilson wants to use them to say something about the experience of African American communities in the 1950s. In that way, this is a theater that is trying to do more than just entertain us. It's also making social commentary. It is trying to teach its audience history. It's trying to help American culture, and I think Wilson would say American culture that's both African American and white, and all other aspects of American culture, understand a vital part of our nation's experience. Keep that idea in mind that Wilson wants this play to be about causing us to think. And now I'm very briefly going to tell you a story about the first time I saw a production of this play. Uh, so the play was being produced at my alma mater, Villanova University, in the late 1980s. The theater at Villanova at that time, I think it's still the case, was actually a really small space. It was a theater in the round, so almost like a black box theater, and it had very tight seating. It only held a couple of hundred people, really, I guess about the size of the black box at the PAC. And the university was putting on a production of August Wilson's Fences. It's actually a terrific production. They faced a problem, though. All of the actors, all the characters are African American. At that time, and Villanova is a very different university now, but at that time, Villanova really didn't have a whole lot of African American students. In fact, I think the African American representation was only 5 or 6%. So it would have been very hard if you think of, the number of theater majors that you have within a typical student body. It would have been very hard to stage the play using student actors. So what the university did is hired actors from Philadelphia, uh, hired professional actors to come in, and then the students, both the graduate students and the undergraduates, worked on the scenery, on the technical aspects of theater, like the lighting. So now in this theater, you have in this very small space, you have some Villanova students, you have people from the surrounding area, the what's known as the main line of Philadelphia, which is kind of upscale suburbs, and a lot of those folks would buy season passes to the theater at Villanova. So those folks, and they are predominantly, if not exclusively, going to be white suburbanites. The other half of the audience are the family and friends of the actors who are on the stage. And then this play begins. And if you noticed anything about the first few minutes of this play, it's that the audience is hit right away with racial language that none of us would ever use in our daily lives. In addition to the language, we are bombarded with a number of the corrosive, hateful, horrible racial stereotypes that have been used against African Americans for hundreds of years. In the theater that evening, as all this is happening on the stage and the players are only a few feet away from the audience, the students, the people from the main line, are feeling incredibly uncomfortable. They are staring there, looking at their shoes like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this is happening. The family and friends of the actors are enjoying the show. They're enjoying the performance. They're laughing at the jokes that some of us wouldn't dare laugh at, even if we could recognize that they were jokes. And there seemed to be within the theater these two very different experiences. The part of the audience was really enjoying the production. The other part was made really uncomfortable. That, I believe, is exactly what August Wilson wants to happen. He bludgeons us at the beginning of this play. By the time we're not 15 seconds into the dialogue before we hear a racial slur. We're not 5 minutes into the discussion between Bono and Troy before we are just pushed around and beaten up by all of these horrible stereotypes. Wilson wants us to feel uncomfortable. He wants the audience to be disrupted. Earlier, before August Wilson, going back to Germany in the 1920s, there was a playwright named Bertolt Brecht, whose plays are still produced fairly frequently. Brecht had this idea of developing what he called epic theater. Later in his life, he called it didactic theater. And the idea was to create a kind of theatrical experience that would cause people to think. So he didn't want what he saw in classical theater, which was uh, the audience, much like we do with a movie, invited to kind of get swept away with the narrative, to become emotionally attached to the characters, to enjoy the show. Instead, Brecht wanted the audience to feel unsettled uh, and sometimes provoked. So he would break down the fourth wall, and sometimes the characters would address the audience directly. He wouldn't darken the theater; he'd have the lights on the whole time, which just makes why are the lights still on? This seems weird. Sometimes he'd have characters walk across the stage with placards, like big signs, giving them information. The scenes themselves, he called it epic theater because he was thinking of like epics, which are and things that are episodic, which are broken up into discrete pieces. He wanted all these like little vignettes and for the audience to be thinking, what do they all have to do with each other? He wanted a theater that was really intellectually engaging, a, a theater that would teach the audience something. August Wilson doesn't use a lot of those techniques in this play. There's nobody coming across with a placard. The and every production I've seen, it's the lighting is done as it's done in a normal theater production. At no point do the characters break through and address the audience directly. Uh, but he's using other techniques, and I think in the beginning of this play, he is using the language and he's using those horrible stereotypes as a way of making us unsettled, making us think. There's something in this play that he wants to teach us, and that lesson is more important than us having the experience of just being swept away and enjoying the play. He wants this to be a theater of ideas. So when we're discussing it, and this is where I want us to begin when we meet Monday morning, I want you to talk about the characters. Troy is the obvious one, and in many ways this is his play. But I want you to think about Troy's character as it develops, and think about nuances and complications in his character, even times when he seems to be a conflicted character. We're all conflicted, right? I mean, none of us is a simple person. We all have different components to ourselves. Troy is a really conflicted character, and I want us to see if we can unpackage some of the ways that he is, and maybe what August Wilson is trying to tell us through Troy, but also through the other characters as well, including Corey, the son that we'll really like, and Lyons, the son that we might not like as much. Uh, what he's saying through all of these characters about the experience of African Americans in the 1950s. So that'll be our job for this week. I look forward to it. Take care, guys.